Hello, welcome back to Madrona's Pulse Teachings. I am Iris and we are doing our astrology of the week ahead. I hope this finds you doing well. We are looking at June 2nd through June 8th. And we are really, this week is literally the last week of working with Jupiter in Gemini. So at the beginning of next week, June 9th, we are going to have Jupiter enter Cancer. That is one of our big shifts of one of many big shifts of 2025, but it is happening at a potent time. It is coming just as Saturn and Neptune entered Aries, and that Jupiter, once it enters Cancer, is gonna square our Saturn and Neptune. That will be in next week's astro forecast. This week, it's important as we move through this week that we are mindfully, Gemini, working with the last week of Jupiter in Gemini. And so this could be a week of especially gaining some insights about the past year. This is going to be especially potent where you have Gemini in your natal chart, because that's the area that Jupiter has literally spent a year moving through. It is lovely. We can focus so much on what's coming, and I do have a video all on Jupiter in Cancer. I'll link it below. But it's wonderful to kind of be with the energies that are here and not getting too ahead of ourselves. And so as we move through this week, it is a week to really experience and reflect on the past year, especially on how your own thinking has changed, on what projects, on what communities, what did you learn, what is different about you now, especially in terms of how you understand yourself and how you think about things than it was a year ago. And we're going to take those reflections into next week. And next week starts off with that big square. And so those reflections are really going to serve you as you move into Jupiter in Cancer, which is very different energy, which is really asking us to lead with our heart and to give a lot of value to emotional ways of knowing. And so, again, doing some of those reflections this year. How has your thinking changed? What groups did you join? What groups showed up? What groups did you leave? Where was thinking changing? How did that show up in your life? These are important things to work with, to journal with, to chat about with friends. And I'll talk a little bit more about that Jupiter. Knowing that that's coming, that is kind of a big theme of this week, is that last week of Jupiter in Gemini. But we also have something interesting going on with our Chiron. So Chiron is conjunct Eris in Aries. It's around 25 degrees. Chiron is going to move to 26 degrees of Aries this week. And we start the week out with Venus having been conjunct Chiron. So they were conjunct on Sunday, on June 1st. And Eris, and Venus moves ahead. We start the week out and she's still in a close conjunction with Chiron and Eris. Especially, and Venus with Chiron, how was your Sunday? How was your June 1st? It can be very tender energy. It can also bring some deep soul wounds up. There is nothing surface level about Chiron. Transiting Chiron in Aries is ongoing healing that we've been working with around our own wounded sense of self, reclaiming our primal fires, reclaiming the right to desire, the right to actually let desire be something that integrates us into the path that we're moving on in this life. Desire that does not come from what others tell us we should be doing or who we should be or what we would be good at, but it comes from our felt flame, and that we're allowed to enjoy that felt flame. That's part of the Chiron healing in Aries. And Venus was conjunct that Chiron on June 1st. Still, we open the week up with Venus moving out of that conjunction. And so Venus there brings in this pouring of divine love, especially divine love that we access through self-love, divine feminine energy, really wanting to nurture and heal some deep pockets of grief, which also means it can be quite tender. Chiron is tender. And so we're coming out of that in the beginning of this week. And then we're going to have Chiron trine Mars. And Mars will also trine Eris. And Mars is in Leo. And so that trine is going to start around the 6th. We're going to start feeling that, and it's going to carry us out through the rest of this week and into next week. The exact trine is actually going to be next week. It's going to be June 10th. But this is a fire trine. So it's kind of like Venus comes and she does some of the wound tending. She does some of the soothing. It's fire soothing. So there's self being reclaimed, but there's a divine love that she's wanting to pour in. And then we get the Mars trine with our passion, with our Mars Leo passion and creativity and joy. Okay, so it's kind of like there's a bit of wound tending, and then from that wound tending, the fire wants to grow, and Mars wants to show us how we want to take action with that healing wound that now can also even have a little bit of fun. Okay, that Chiron can get a drive in terms of how your own journey of reclaiming in a very personal way. This is about you. This is about your fire. This is about your primal fire and your primal needs meeting your joy and creativity, not to gain the validation of others, but to simply be your joyful, creative, playful self, and how that energy wants to go into your life right now. Okay, so it is healing and forward moving energy, working with that very deep chironic wound that we have. Okay, but so, and especially if the Venus was quite tender, the conjunction, the Mars comes after and it wants to take us forward a bit. Okay, and it wants to bring us into a little action, and it wants to be on reclaiming your joy. So that energy is here this week. Interestingly, that Mars is also in an inconjunct with with the North Node in Pisces, and that's the beginning of the week. So in the beginning of the week, that Mars is getting a little reworking before it goes into that Chiron conversation, while Chiron is conjunct Venus. That Mars is in an inconjunct with North Node in Pisces, and it is there kind of learning, right, I don't just want my joy and my creative energy so that I can make a splash and have people tell me how wonderful I am. No. I want it so that my soul can feel connected and I can feel that gorgeous sense of belonging that comes when we are moving from places that are soul driven and not driven by the conditioning of fear that comes in so many places. And when Leo is conditioned by fear, it performs roles in its everyday life, and it performs for that sense of kind of gratification that comes from having people tell us that we're doing good, and we all want that, and in some ways we need it. But when that is what's driving Leo, it gets into a vicious circle. The inconjunct in the beginning of this week helps Mars to get aligned to kind of the soul soothing connections, and then from there it goes into that trine with Chiron, and it's ready to take that chironic wound with joy that's coming from that soul connection and go out into the world with it through your own primal fires. And the other piece I wanted to mention to you is we keep dipping into our divine feminine scorpionic ways, and we keep doing that this week. And there's this interesting dance going on all week with Vesta, who's retrograde in Scorpio, and Black Moon Lilith, true Black Moon Lilith. Okay, and so it's going to be this little dance between 2 and 5 degrees of Scorpio. Vesta is at 5 degrees of Scorpio. And there is something about healing and reclaiming your deep alchemist, reclaimed witchy healer ways for yourself in a way that we don't have to hide them. We don't have to put them back in the closet or only listen to the astro videos when people aren't around or whatever it is. This is about claiming the parts of yourself that have some spiritual gifts of healing and are also connected to a deep part of the self that doesn't want to take any BS, that doesn't want to hide herself, himself, themselves, that just wants to be their creative, deeply feeling, a little bit raw, alchemizing self. You cannot alchemize without working with the depths, without working with everything that we get told we're not supposed to show because it's not pretty, it's not proper. And this, of course, is very gendered in terms of what a woman's not supposed to show, what a man's not supposed to show. We crumple all that up and we throw that away. Black Moon Lilith does a little bit of a dance on it as we throw it away. And we're reclaiming. And so this energy is here. It is inviting for healing, and especially the parts of ourselves where we've been taught that we're too wild, that we don't belong, that we're too deep. Scorpio, too mysterious. So many astro stereotypes of Scorpio that I won't go into because then I'll be here for way too long, right? And this is about just reclaiming those raw parts of yourself. And they're going to be exact on the 8th. They're in a little dance all week, and then on the 8th, at the end of this week, they're exact. And it is an opportunity for leaning into that kind of healing and that alchemy and claiming, allowing. And that actually goes lovely with the Aries Chiron that is claiming its raw, pulsing, divine self energy flame that's getting lit up by Mars and Leo. And what is quite lovely about the end of this week and that move and shift from Jupiter into Cancer is that Mercury is conjunct Jupiter. Okay, so they're going to be conjunct the last day of Jupiter's time in Gemini and the last day of this week on the 8th. And Mercury is conjunct at that 29th degree of Gemini. And it is there to help us receive the messages and insights that we can carry forth into this year-long journey of Jupiter in Cancer, and especially the next week of Jupiter in Cancer coming into a square with Saturn and Neptune in Aries. That Saturn and Neptune are dissolving the structures that we have lived our lives by, that we have measured ourselves by, that we have defined ourselves by. And of course, that dissolving is related to collective structures dissolving. But in our very personal life and work and reflection, our lives are changing. And this is a transit. Remember, Neptune and Saturn, we are with them until next year. We don't have to have it figured out. But there could be, next week, there's big energy around what's dissolving has got to dissolve so that we can honor our emotional ways of knowing and being and what our heart truly desires. Because that is what needs to take us forward. And if we're repressing emotions, if we're not honoring our emotional self, Jupiter is going to help us become aware of that when it's working with Saturn and Neptune. More on that later. But heading into that, we get this conjunction of Jupiter and Mercury, the messenger of the gods, in its own sign with Jupiter. Really, it's a wonderful day for journaling. And really just wherever the journal goes, wherever it takes you. It's a lovely day for reflection. And also, it is a lovely day to set intentions for what heart-centered life looks like to you now, at this point in your life. It might have meant something 5 years ago or 20 years ago. And this is about letting those old definitions of ourself dissolve, Saturn and Neptune and Aries, so that we can create new ones. And what does it mean for those new structures to be centered around our heart's love and needs and taking care of ourselves emotionally, and letting that taking care of ourselves emotionally go in to how we want to show up in the world and what we want to achieve and offer and be part of and connected and part of these new systems of new ways of doing this whole human thing as we move into the next years and work with our outer planets. And there we have it. I am sending you love from here in Nova Scotia, and I will see you soon. Bye.